Welcome to Believers and Nonbelievers in Discussion. Our topic today is who defines morality? A quick reminder, we are on iTunes now with a podcast. There's also an RSS feed, so check the Facebook page, check the website, believeinreality.com, and then you'll see that. And because this costs us a little something, there's a Patreon page up now to help support us. So I want to thank everybody here today, first off, because we have a new location we're at, and it's a great thing because we have new voices and new people and new opinions, and since we're trying to, in part, get this sort of lesson out to everybody that it's okay to talk to each other in a friendly way, this is a terrific thing. Introducing left to right, if I can get this correct, Kevin McCaffrey from Indiana Purdue University?
Yeah.
And you're a sociologist?
I am.
And Ravon Bowens?
Bowens.
Oof.
Thanks. That's okay.
She's from the Desert Atheist Freethinkers? Oh, the name just changed.
Close enough. Desert Atheist Community, I think.
Thank
now.
you. Okay. And to my right, we have Greg Harris, who's the senior pastor where we're sitting right now at Olive Branch Community Church. And to his right is Stephen Oldham, also from Olive Branch here, and he's an outreach coordinator. Now, today this is kind of a big topic, who defines morality. This is sort of a classic topic. So we're going to start as usual with position statements, and then we'll get into it and just kind of let it flow and see where it goes. So who wants to start? Any volunteers? All right, let's go with the pastor.
All right, yeah.
They talk the easiest. So.
Home rules.
Yeah, impromptu speaking. All right. So we're talking about the question of who defines morality.
Yeah.
Which I'm guessing we're taking morality differently than ethics.
I actually don't know. So
okay, cool.
You can if you want to go into that, go ahead and define it. But
I think the best is to start. Obviously, I'm a Christian. I've been a Christian for since 97. So been a pastor for the last 14 years. So did my schooling at Biola University. So kind of thinking through morality is always a question that we're always talking about. So it begins, obviously, for us in kind of the broader meta-narrative of the biblical worldview in the sense of creation. And then creation begins, obviously, with God. Before there's anything else, there's God who has created this world. So it's his world. It's his domain. And so he's created humanity in his image, in a relationship with him, in a relationship with the earth, and a relationship with each other. And so intended to be the stewards of his world, and therefore that comes naturally in relationship, come rules and come connections, especially as we do not own ourselves. We are his, and so we represent him. We therefore need to represent him. And so that's the basis beginning point of morality, is that because God exists, he's made us in his image, we are to represent him rightly, and therefore he is the governing authority of morality. And we then judge ourselves according to that. Now, obviously, we then move on from the creation where God had created this to be right, created us to be in that relationship to where humanity's rebelled. And so the essence of morality becomes a rebellion in that relationship. So we cease to seek God for the ultimate standard. We look to ourselves. We look to nature and the world. We look to other kinds of ideas, maybe in our cases, the angelic or demonic realm, these kind of thoughts. And so what begins to develop from there is an ethic or a morality based on self as the definition. And so we would see that as the competing narrative reality. And so God is constantly, in his loving stance towards us, calling us back to him, calling us back to how he created the world, how he created the moral law, how he created the scientific law, and all of this. And we were to govern it according to those things. And then as we've rebelled against that and pushed that away, we have gone out seeking for our own definitions of those laws and rules. And you get different societal laws, you get different cultural laws, sociological laws, all these different kind of things emerge as humanity seeks to do it in their own fashion, their own way. And so from there, we wind up with existing this sin, what we call sin, which is the gap between our relationship with God and man, which is created by our immoral choices, our immoral actions, and our lack of representing him rightly. And so some people will ask questions like, well, why is lying such a big deal? And I say, well, because we represent God, and God's not a liar. Therefore, God's offended by us taking his ID, his credentials, in a sense. We've done identity theft, and we represented him poorly as a liar. We represent him poorly as an adulterer, or we represent him poorly in whatever various form that we were to represent him rightly, we misrepresent him. And therefore, he has a moral obligation in his justice to deal with us. And so that begins the conundrum in Christianity, where we would say that moral dilemma between our misrepresentation of him and his love for us, though he is just, creates a situation in which he has to judge humanity, judge those who are to represent him rightly, as any good, just judge would, and deal with all the evils of humanity against one another and against him. And at that point, there's a judgment set according to the storyline, and that becomes the basis upon which redemption needs to occur. And so we would say that God, seeing humanity can't do it, comes to earth himself in Jesus Christ, representing true and full humanity, to not only point people to the fault of the distance between us, but then to give a gracious entry back to him, since we can't earn it. There's no legal way to earn back favor, because favor is something given. Favor is not something earned. And so he comes and gives a good, perfect grace by dying on the cross, bearing the bridge, the gap, the immorality upon himself on the cross, therefore bringing us back in relationship with the one who created us. Now from that, as he lives in us, we can begin to make moral movements. We can adjudicate our cultural distance from him, our personal distance from him, and all of these other gaps. And therefore, we can stand back with his teaching, with his presence, and begin to make moral assessments for the correction of ourselves, society, and beyond. And so with the ultimate destiny of his return, which he will bring everything back to perfect rightness, because even though we're redeemed, we still carry those tendencies, whether we can call it scientifically, the ruts and rutting in our brain, or the Bible calls it the flesh, in which we are we're beholden to sin, we lean to sin, we like evil. It's easier to start a bad habit than to start a good habit. It's easier to end a good habit and then to end a bad one. And so there's this tendency seemingly within us to bend into the evil. And so God's redeeming that, transforming that. It'll take an ultimate correction of all of the earth and all of humanity in his return. So this is a basic storyline. A lot of things break out from that.
Okay, I'm going to hold you right there. Quick question, because you threw out a phrase that I'm not familiar with, scientific law. How do you define scientific law?
The laws of nature, E equals MC squared, the laws of gravity, these kind of things are apprehended in the universe. We can study them scientifically, discover them. Interestingly enough, they're pretty much, in our theological department, they're very similar to moral law. Simple, universal, unbreakable. Then so there's a very clear connection in many Christians, well, at least many studied Christians' minds, between scientific law and moral law.
Okay. Would this be naturalistic law?
You could say it's natural laws, an application
of the puzzle.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Ravon?
Sure. Yeah, I'm going to address this issue probably from two areas in the secular community, being non-believers, that one believe that morals belong to those who don't have any gods, and then also to the American Humanist Association. So I would just kind of like to put out those precepts that they put out, and then kind of fold in with my beliefs about this. First off, one of our leading non-theist persons, Sam Harris, basically believes that the moral landscape, the good and the bad, the right and the wrong that we live as humans, is a landscape. There's different varying degrees of good and bad and right and wrong. But through science, we know what is good and bad, right and wrong. What it is whatever assists in the well-being of sentient human beings and animals. What doesn't do harm in the long run. I think for a long time, and Sam Harris talks about this, that there was this, what we called non-overlapping magisterium, where the church gets all the morals and those non-churchy people get all the science. And it was a mistake to let that go on for so long. The way that we know what is right and wrong, what is good and bad, is through science, what is proven to be best for yourself personally and for the fulfillment of humanity as a whole. Secondly, the American Humanist Association, as all the other humanist associations, their belief is that it is your ability and your responsibility to lead an ethical life, what personally fulfills you and what is for the greater good of humanity. And the only way that you can find that is through science. You can't find it through a spokesman for any book that was written a long, long time ago. It has to be proven. It has to be a repeatable scientific experiment that shows that even though we have differences in how we treat women, how we treat people of color, how we treat people of other sexual orientations, that they all fall within acceptable humanitarian limits. If we don't do this, there are not just wrongs that are done to people. We know the wrongs that are done through religious beliefs to African Americans, to the LGBTQ community, to women. Their lives are, quote unquote, hell for a long time until science proved that what we were doing was wrong. Even though the church backed up our actions, we had to prove through political science and through science that those were not correct actions and to right them. There's also other lost opportunities. How many lives have been lost because we didn't have stem cell research in this country based on some religious beliefs, some wrong religious beliefs about what science and what medicine can do? How many long and lingering deaths have we had people have to put up because of the right to life issue? It's not just the harm that's done, it's also the lost opportunities. On the other hand, it's important that science solves this moral issues with all the gods out there, God and Allah and Buddha and Voldemort and whoever. They each have their own idea of what the religious morality should be, and we can't reconcile all those. As we become a global globe, as we get into globalization, it is important to set a moral standard for the whole world. And we are not going to resolve the Palestinian, Arab, Christian, Jewish, Muslim conflict because they're all backed into corners. Lastly, I'd also like to quote Dan Dennett, whose belief in morals is that it shouldn't be what we accept as religious morals, where there's a trickle-down moral. It comes from on high someplace, from some, to us, mythical, magical place, and will trickle down to us because we are some lesser being than a pastor or a god or a monsignor. We already know the harm in that. Instead, he believes it should be a bubble up. We should bubble up from mutual, rational, skeptical exploration about what is good for us, and then build it up from that point. There is a danger in trying to admit to yourself that you do not have the capability to figure out right from wrong and evil from good. The danger is that we are the biggest, baddest thing in our universe, and we have the ability to figure this out and to make us a true global force of humans.
But what I'm struck with there is your comment that we know good and bad through science. Would you consider that to be an objective morality?
Yes, objective in the sense that I speak of taking cases of moral injustice that have happened over the centuries and happening now, looking at them and saying, was this for the greater good of the people involved and the greater good for humanity? And if we had to replicate it, would the same results come out? And that's the standard of science, is replicable scientific experiment. We don't have to run an experiment about does it hurt to cut someone's arm off. We know this. We can hold that as a moral standard. And once you say that there is some good and bad, you have set the landscape, and it doesn't become subjective. That's the best thing about science, is that you wait for other scientists to jump on your results and try to prove you wrong. And you take pride in that. Whereas I think sometimes in a religious community, there's a fear of questioning your pastor or your monsignor or your Bible or Quran.
I think there's an argument to be made that talking about Sam Harris as an example,
Sure.
when he says that we set morals according to what is good for sentient beings, which you mentioned, that definition itself is a subjective definition. So I think there's an argument to be made that it may not be But I'm going to
Sure.
let this side
Sure.
of the table bring those points out.
You bet.
Just
And there's a good
little-
answer to this.
Okay, terrific.
Great, thank you.
Let's jump over to Steve.
Well, just listening to Greg talk a little bit, I guess my views are not too far different from that, but coming from my perspective as a social worker with the social work and psych background, well, it's a matter of really the objectivity being the most important thing as far as how do you determine what is the best determination of objectivity when it comes to making moral decisions. Is it us as humanity, or is there an outside standard of us that we should comply to? And so as a Christian, what it offers me when I look at science or when I look at things, I can see the limitations of empiricism. How are other ways that we know things? How can a person know things? And one of the things that Christianity does provide, along with empiricism, is a way to know a thing. And so revelation becomes a concern for us as far as believing that God reveals to us how we should act because he designed us in a certain way and knows what's best, even above and beyond us. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have a certain set of standards that he's created within us that we can actually identify things. It's how we identify things through science. It's how we identify things as good and bad, but we're not the perfect arbiter of what's good and bad, that we need an outside objective source like the Bible or a text, or even the idea of what truth is, and it can be derived by people, that people can look at the same object abstractly and come to the same conclusions because it is an objective thing. So the question I always have is really philosophically is who created that objective thing? Where did it come from? What's the most likely conclusion as to how it got here? And that's the standard I should bend my will to even when I'm flawed. So that's what I think the only real difference really would be is that because I value empiricism, I value science and the scientific method. I just feel it's limited in that regard as to what is moral. So that was really all I would say other than, and just probably echo mostly what Greg said as far as like needing a God and our relationship with him. That's pretty much the same for me as well.
Okay. When you talk about truth, you're talking about what's true in terms of what is morally good and bad, the truth of that, or truth of other, or something broader?
Well, is there a thing, can we agree to, is there a thing that is truth? Now, there are some truths that are kind of evident in the fact that we can look at them in the tangible world. They're materials, I can identify them. But when we're talking about abstract truths like love or goodness or freedom or liberty, are those objective or they're just subjective to our opinion? Do we just create them out of whole cloth? Or is there a thing that whether we're here or not, it exists? And because it exists, I can make conclusions about it, and it is an actual thing. And then it becomes, well, who's the author of that? What's the most likely thing as an author? So
You're anticipating one of my questions as soon as we're done with the intro here. But what strikes me here is that I'm wondering if good moral behavior is objective or subjective. Doesn't really matter
Yes.
if it's subjective or objective, as long as we end up in a place where we are performing good moral behavior.
is that a question?
Yeah.
Do I agree that it doesn't matter whether it's
Does it
objective
matter
or
if it's
subjective?
objective? I mean, we're going to probably get into that debate about whether or not it's objective or subjective, but it doesn't really matter if we come out.
Yeah,
with
I think for me it does, because you're talking about matters of taste versus matters of truth. For matters of taste, like I like bananas, that's true to me. It's not necessarily true to someone else. There's a subjectivity to that kind of a truth, right? But it's all my experience. There's not a debate on whether is freedom, are all people free. That's more of an object. It has more objectivity than it does subjectivity, because now we're talking about how we should govern as a group, as a whole. It exists outside ourselves. So when we relegate things like morality or even religion to matters of taste, then you have a problem, because it's just like, well, I like vanilla and you like strawberry. But if it's an actual truth, is there something that we have to all derive? We're all working towards a common understanding of that objective thing. Okay. Being flawed people, we may come to different conclusions.
So the suggestion there is that it's not reliable.
We're not a reliable.
It's not reliable to when you allow people to have a taste of, make a decision about what's moral, that we're going to, on average, have the best outcome necessarily. Is that appropriate?
I guess if what you're saying is if there is no objectivity to it, that's apart from just my subjective experience, then it is hard to actually come to a conclusion at all. I don't know how you derive a conclusion if it doesn't have some objectivity to it,
okay,
and exist outside of me.
Okay,
so
fair enough. Kevin, over to you.
Yeah, so let me say first that Greg and Stephen, we agree entirely on the metaphysics of morality, I think. But we're using different words. We're using different symbols. We're using different phrases. And we're making different noises in terms of the sentences that we're using. But we have the same view, that you need an objective standard, and that the deepest question of morality is rectifying our subjective whims, our sinful natures, whatever you'd like to call it, with some sort of objective standard. But we're defining this differently, but we agree. And it makes sense that we would agree because we're intelligent primates that are earnestly trying to understand something of significant value to us. And we've come to similar conclusions. I'm going to echo much of what you say, but I'm going to use different terms. I'm going to use different words. Okay, so I'm a naturalist. So this means that I come to the issue of morality from the perspective that human beings are a certain primate, and there are other primates we're related to. And you can document this relatedness in genetic tests, and in addition to the fossil record and other kinds of evidence. Now, we can debate about evolution. I know this is a contentious issue for a lot of people of faith. And look, if you're a Christian, you can say, all right, evolution happened and God just watched over it and made sure it ended up in humanity. And I might not take that teleological view that evolution was searching for a human end. But you can take that view if you'd like, that God made this process. Fine, all right. So humans, by that logic, if we're going to take that, are a certain type of primate. We're related to primates. We're vastly different. Chimps have no concept of truth, beauty, justice, love like we do. And humans do, of course, have these concepts. And so this makes us, I would say, qualitatively different, although, well, quantitatively different. Our brains are just bigger in certain places, but it leads to a qualitative change, culture, society, that these animals just don't quite have. So I take this perspective now. Now, this is objective, okay? This is a fact independent of us, the evolutionary biology of human beings. Now, this means if we're a primate that we all face, meaning all human groups, face certain, certain problems in common. Child rearing, coalitional fighting, foraging, and resource acquisition from the environment. These problems are marriage and relationship between people in terms of how they inherit goods and things like this. So all human groups have these problems. These are problems of hierarchy, problems of kinship, problems that frankly all mammals share, but chimps and bonobos and other higher primates do it in an especially elaborate way, and we take it to a whole nother damn level entirely, no doubt. Okay, so we're all going to share these common problems. We have this shared evolutionary history. This is an objective fact. Now, we as humans, we are just raised by our parents and by our community, and they give us information. Some of it's good, some of it's not. We make friends. Some of them are good, some of them aren't. Some of them care more about pursuing truth than others. And so we get some good information, some not good information. But we care about morality, and so we try to make noises about morality, about what matters, about how we should organize ourselves, about how we should treat ourselves, etc. And we make all these noises about it, and they're noises that are informed by our peers and by our family, and some of them are true, and some of them are false, and some of them are ridiculous, and some of them are wise. And so the only way to know for sure, if we're approximating objective morality, as I've just defined it, is if we treat our moral claims as I call them, interdisciplinary attempts at facts. And Sam changed my mind significantly on this, him and others. There's a school of philosophy called moral realism, which is quite interesting. And the idea is, well, if the default position of our lives is natural, that is to say, everything in the universe can be naturally understood, maybe not the why it exists, but how it works, then we can kind of approach something as sacred as morality from this angle. And this would make morality a science of subjectivity. And if there were no conscious animals in the universe, there would be no possibility for a science of morality. Fine. And this was your question of, all right, well, you need values. We should value human well-being. Fine. Look, if you want to be a good physicist, you don't need to value human well-being. You need to have other values: falsifiability, testability, peer review. You have to genuinely value these things. Okay, you don't need to value human happiness. Good. But if you're going to do sociology, if you're going to do psychology, if you're going to do anthropology, if you're going to do a science that tries to understand why human beings organize the way they do and how that changes and why, then you have to understand that they care about each other, and they care about their families, and they care about their damn kids. And atoms don't quite care about each other in the same way, not in this emotional way. So Sam changed my mind about this. So here's my answer to the subjective morality. We're going to make a lot of noises, we're going to make a lot of claims about the universe, the moral universe, how we should organize each other, how we should arrange ourselves relative to one another. And we have to treat these as attempts at facts. So let's use the gay marriage thing. This is the birthday, the wedding cake. This is in the news again, Mike. Okay, look.
You're about out of time, so.
Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. I'll shut up. That's good enough.
Yeah, that's a good enough start, I think, right there. We'll hold. we can bring that as a separate subject. So you're saying that it's not the what is specifically moral that's the objective thing. What's objective is that morality has natural origins.
Yes.
Is this what I hear?
And what morality is it's the problems that animals face collectively. Food, foraging, resource acquisition, childbearing, and these vary by the animal, by the kingdom of the animals in it. So we can talk about morality in a really abstract sense if we like, but for humans, we share these common problems of organization. We care about them. They have primatological and evolutionary origins. So that's the objective side of morality, yeah.
Okay. There's a distinction there, I'm thinking, but... Okay. So, responses and challenges to everybody's position here. Anybody want to throw something out?
I'd like to ask Greg and Steve, you kind of following up on Kevin's idea of us that we're all primates. One of the differences between us and other animals, other mammals, is the lack of instinct. The lack of instinct is such an important thing. We are born with a couple instincts to suckle and to not fall off of a cliff, I think. After that, for us humans, we got to make choices, and we have to have informed choices. I think that I would be interested in your take on this, that in my mind, instinct versus choice is almost analogous to God versus science, that it seems to me that religion proposes that you don't have a lot of choice. It comes from above. Your morals come from your God or your Allah or your Buddha and come down on you. You don't have to think about it. We've got this all figured out for you. Whereas I see morality through science as I don't have any instinct. I don't have any guidance from above. We have to figure this out scientifically. And so I'm interested in your take on that.
Yeah, no, I find that fascinating that you would take it that way. I guess the way I would explain it is that the concept of theology and what God does, he doesn't detail the points of ethics. He draws the broadest boundaries of morality, and within that become ethical conundrums and questions we need to work with. So that's why there's 10 commandments, and in fact, Jesus even reduces it to 2. Love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And very specifically describes that love as self-giving. Sacrifice your life, your desires, your needs. That is the definition of love, and therefore that's the definition of a life lived for God. Now, on the flip side, though, I was curious because choice exists for us very strongly because God enables choice. In a materialistic viewpoint, which I'm guessing when you say naturalist, you would agree that you're materialist in the sense that there's only matter and reality.
For you, it's different. 'Cause I would say that you would be a
Yes, I am a materialist, but yes.
And so would you say that scientific law dictates then how we respond? Where does choice come from in a materialist world?
Oh, it's a great question. So
is there a choice?
Sure. Yeah, is there a
If you
choice?
push me, I'm going to say that there's no free will. I can't justify it in a fully naturalistic, honest worldview, but there is certainly the perception of free will. And there are free will itself is multi-causal. It's caused by so many things.
So
and I'll never know all of them.
Hitler had to do what he did by the laws that were surrounding him.
Yeah, because he was made in that environment, so therefore he's
Raised in the environment.
Had no choice.
He did.
You know what? This is a problem. This is not a problem with naturalism because it's inevitable if the logic follows, but it is one that is emotionally very difficult. But I think push comes to shove, I have to concede that there was an inevitability to what Hitler did, and also an inevitability to the passing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and an inevitability to the backlash to Hitler and to the criticism of what he did. So if we're going to look at Hitler and say he was inevitable, we also have to look at the very powerful moral response to Hitler as equally inevitable.
Okay, so that's why I was curious about
and I
the question.
would differ with Kevin on this, on the idea that if there is any inevitability to Hitler, it would be because of our human race lacking science for so long to figure out how the world works, so that somehow a very evil man glommed onto the idea that they're superior races. Well, where did he get that idea? Well, we got raised that way.
No,
you
no,
know,
no,
we,
no. We didn't get it from science.
well, you can disagree with me later, but anyway, that's the whole idea.
12 seconds
Yeah,
later.
yeah,
That's tribalism. Humans are prone to tribalism.
Right.
He was a tribalist. He was an
Okay.
ideologue. This
Right.
is human nature.
So
This is
if
primate
it's
nature.
inevitable, it's because we didn't try to figure out morals scientifically and rationally back at that time. We all did stick to our tribes, to our beliefs about why we are better than you, why we might be picked by God or Allah. I think that's an inevitable outcome of sticking to your Allah tribe, God tribe, Buddha tribe kind of thing.
I guess I have a question, because to me, I don't know. I look at science as a tool, right? I don't look at it as a standard of morality. There's a philosophical underpinning to any scientific endeavor. How much of an empiricism you are, or whether you're a phenomenologist, someone who believes that the existential experience is the most important thing about science. So how does science make a morality in its practice? And then is there any limitation for you? Because like science can be very objective and it's just like, well, this is what we found, but that doesn't tell me what I should do with it. Like I said, the Nazis were doing scientific experiments for the benefit of their own particular group. If that valued the majority of humanity, let's say, would that be a negative? So if I can do one bad thing to one person, but it helps me do a whole bunch of good for science and the benefit of other people, even if it's against their will, how does science arbitrate these kind of disputes? Like the biggest thing that I have, and when we did scientific experiments, is ethics. Who decides this? It has to go through a review board. Are we doing harm to people? Those aren't scientific things. Those are philosophical understandings. How we come to that conclusion is based on my philosophy, not my science. So Nazis can do science. Moralists can do science. Many people can do science. So I have a hard time thinking of science as something that I can live by or make principles from. So how does one do that?
And I would say, I think because the misconception of science, I think you're thinking of hard science, and I understand
Well,
that. But
psychology is
at the same
considered
time,
one
Kevin
of the softer
also
ones.
talked about soft sciences. The soft sciences are simply as valid as the hard sciences. And it is the soft sciences. Philosophy is a science. And I think you see a wall there between hard science and morals, where I see no wall, because all sciences, including the soft science, philosophy, sociology, answer those questions.
Well, you're going to have a lot. I'm going to disagree with you
sure,
on that,
sure.
because I mean, soft science is like archaeology. You're trying to put together bits and pieces and make an implication of what's there, as opposed to doing a chemical reaction. You know, they're very, very
Concrete.
very concrete things.
questions.
Yeah,
Right.
so I'm not going to quite agree with that.
Okay.
So I think there's room for that argument.
Can I briefly ask a question of Greg? So when I the first thing I said was I think we have a lot in common. You said that there were two central components of the Old Testament that Jesus emphasized. What was the first one?
Basically, he summed up the Ten Commandments as
Ten Commandments. I'm sorry.
Love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength.
Lord God. So this would be love the community. I'm saying from a scientific point of view, I'm not trying to make any kind of religious interpretation. I'm saying in the language that I use, I think when I say the following, I'm saying what you mean. That the person, I am fully dependent on my community. I didn't make any of my own clothes. I can't cut my hair. I can't do anything for myself. I eat TV dinners if I don't have time, because I can't even hardly cook. And so I'm fully dependent on my community. And I was dependent on my parents. And so if I don't love them, my community and my parents, I am literally nothing. I mean, I wouldn't even be able to take care of myself.
Well, hold on. Let me
Isn't that
ask you.
similar to what you mean?
No, because really he's dividing the Ten Commandments up into two groupings. The first four commandments are about your relationship with God. I mean, commandment
Society
number.
for me.
Well, let me. In our viewpoint, God is an actual person. He's not a construct. He's not he's not a philosophical creation amongst the group of people.
Society
He's
is an
a
abstraction
true,
of people.
actual living being that we've encountered in time, space, reality, that has acted in this world,
Yes.
done specific things.
Society does all of this. And it's
So-
more powerful than me. I will never be as powerful as society.
No. You're
Society
using an emergent thinking where almost like our neurons work together and create the emergent mind and so we work together and we create an emergent morality. I'm talking about a literal person. And so he would be a part of that real community. And he says in the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. So that that has nothing to do with a societal connection.
I can. If I care more about Britain's society than American society, then that's a dumb thing to do. I should worship my society. I should appreciate all societies, and I should advocate for human rights for all people. But of course, I'm going to love my society more because it made me, and I depend on it.
Well, I understand that. I get what you're saying, but I think you're not hearing that. I literally believe that there is a being and there's a supernatural realm. There's a beyond the material. There is greater than the material. It organizes the material. That is pre the material. And therefore, I would say that we have you're using different sounds.
Yeah, different language.
That do not have the same meanings to us.
But Greg, I think what you said, it boils down to two things: love God and love your community. Is that correct?
Love God and love. It says love your neighbor as yourself.
Right. So for you have to have those two things. You have to love God and then love community. And I think Kevin's saying, for him, if he had a God, it would be his community. He would have one commandment.
That is my God.
Right, and he would be breaking the second commandment.
Exactly, for both
that's
of us.
That's how it would be interpreted.
I appreciate that.
We don't have that first
Oh,
commandment.
I totally understand that.
But the emotions are the same, and what I care about is the same, and what I'm trying to express, I think, is the same. I mean, maybe you disagree. Maybe there's a power in the words you're using that you think mine lack, but...
I would say we're using two different dictionaries.
Okay, quick question. Okay. Use the phrase emergent morality. So that is a morality that comes from humans over time and societies, right?
I would disagree with that position, but it's an idea that I've encountered, yeah.
So we'll define that phrase then, because it sounded like you were just saying that there is a morality that comes of society. Now that seems to be a morality we can work with just as well as we can say, okay, here's one concept of morality that comes from here, it's a solid thing. Here's another concept that comes from a deity, and there's another...
So granted, an emergent morality exists when you don't have a standard beyond humanity. And so what I mean by that is, so as Kevin had said, if there's no humans, there's no morality. We would say that there was still morality even without humanity. There was still a right and a wrong. And so... that morality, therefore, must be emergent. And it's either emerges because of evolutionary transformation of the brain, societal connections, and how we deal with each other. So it's a difference between what we call an objective morality in the sense of it exists without humanity, versus an emergent morality.
So, but what I'm wondering here is why does that... It seems like a perfectly valid morality then. Why would that be... Actually, maybe you weren't implying that it would be a worse morality than a God-based morality. Why is that insufficient?
I think there's a difference between talking pragmatically about morality and talking about groundings of definitions. So when we get into a conversation of pragmatics, what works best for one another is what we ought to do. Now, I understand that pragmatics works sometimes, and I'm not averse to as much pragmatism as I'm just born in it. It's an American way of doing things. Doesn't work well in a lot of other societies that don't view pragmatism as right. They view communalism as better. I think you would speak probably better to the differences. So that a pragmatic answer, I feel like that's not the game that we're working on in a sense. We're working from an objective position where whether it pragmatically works out or not doesn't determine whether it's right or not.
Okay, because here's the problem I have with that. Again, if we have two sets of moralities and they're both kind of working, if we take the Judeo-Christian God and say this God has created an objective morality and it's just a given statement, then we have the problem with taking that same concept from another person with another belief system that says, no, my God has created the morality, and then this other one over here has created, and then we are in that realm of not knowing which to follow, and also in the realm of each of those trying to compete with each other by saying, well, yours is not the right one, and now we have conflict. This is the problem I have with the
Again, I think you're working from a conversation of pragmatism, and my question...
No, I'm working from a...
It's because I get it. In an interfaith conversation, pragmatism is what we have.
From a conversation of wanting to know which one is real. We haven't quite got there yet.
Right. And I think that would be the difference. Does morality exist beyond the human being? Or does morality only exist because human beings exist?
I think what
Yeah.
Phil might be asking, and I'm asking the same thing. You as Christians have a Christian morality, although it's very wide depending on what Christian you are. How do you defend your rightness and goodness to the morality of a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Wicca or an atheist? How do you say that yours is right and theirs is wrong?
That goes back to just the simple question: does God exist?
Well,
and-
who's God?
Well, no, that's a great
Does
question.
a God exist?
Does
What
a
does
God
that
exist
God
first?
look like? Is there some objectivity we can come to understanding God? What do our texts say? Their text versus our. We're exploring truth claims. See, the thing about religious people, and when I have interfaith dialogues with people, we are trying to find out what the truth is about God. We're not denying that there isn't a way to do that. That you can. We came to different conclusions because we have different evidences. But I still feel that there's an objectivity to God, and if God's a person. And I know, and he can be known, he probably has an opinion about how he should be known. And what we think about it is secondary to the truth of that aspect.
So you believe that at some point the Goddess and the Allahists and the Voldemortists or whoever they are
That's
are
the
gonna-
bad guy.
But they're all gods. All of these God folks are going to somehow get together and iron out all of their differences.
I don't think that's different than anything that we do in life. We argue over objective truth all the time. So, like, if you say there is no God, that's an opinion of God. You don't believe there is one, so you're going to operate on that theory. What proof do you have? What evidence? What do you use as text or support? Some people use science, some people use... It's the same problem. Like, if you take God out of the equation, we're still just trying to come to some common understanding. How do we do that without a...
Can I propose a thought experiment for you for this side? Okay, you two are in a room, or one of you is in a room, and there's a person of some other religion that you've never met, and there's one piece of bread, and you have to get through this day, and you'll starve if you don't eat this piece of bread. Let's just speculate, or half of the bread. And the other person's religious belief is that the bread cannot be split. Only one person can eat the bread. Okay, but you obviously both want to survive. Are you going to say that person is justified in that religious belief that only one of you can eat the bread, so only one of you can live? Or don't you think it's reasonable to say, look, I know you have a religious belief that you can't split the bread, but if we split the bread, we'll both live.
Well, that's
don't you think you could appeal to reason? Isn't that fair?
Yeah, but that's the funny thing about the Christian moral dilemma. We would basically say, then eat the bread. I would rather die and you live.
And you would really do that in that situation?
I think I would be pretty strongly compelled in that direction.
I respect that commitment. It's just, it's wild to think.
But that is a difficult question. I don't think a scientific examination of that could answer that question.
I think
The question, even in that scenario, is what brings about the greatest good for this situation? We're all concluding that based on our
both
worldview.
living, clearly. That's why I made the thought.
That would be your particular opinion. But is that
two people living instead of one?
you would be defining good in that sense? Is what I'm saying.
Fair. Well, who wouldn't define good in that sense?
But that's the same thing I'm saying. When we're talking about religion, someone's defining what they think is God. And so in the same word phrase that you're using in that scenario, that's what we're doing. So if two people of different faiths are coming together, we're debating over what the aspects of God actually is. Right. And so to me, it's the same. So there's a lot of people say, well, I can't believe in something, or I can't believe in a God, or this or that, because all this bad stuff. Well, if you remove God out of the equation, there's still bad stuff. What is your answer to that? So
there's two answers here. One is, let's split the bread, we both win. The other argument, we both live. The other argument is, you're going to die because my belief is you can't eat the bread and only one of us can. That second argument does not have any moral weight to me because only one person is living instead of two. But you're going to say, well, but that's their belief. So
say from a theist point of view, though, if there is an actual God, and that's what serves this person best, me dying, I'm willing to do that because that's the greater good for me.
So it's a kind of pacifism. What if we were invaded by
But you can also take that in the other direction.
But you may not. You sure can.
Your God could say that you're the one who is more worthy of living.
Right.
Well, again, we're talking from a Christian perspective, obviously. I wouldn't take that. I would deny that out of hand as a Christian. I would say my God has told me that I'm going to live beyond death. Therefore, I can hand this over
that's why I'm taking it to brought up the comparison of other belief systems. I study belief rather than one specific religion. So this is one of the faults I see with your argument, is that you're taking the good choice, but you can just as validly choose the worst choice, essentially, and have a moral righteousness to it.
But isn't that the case? How can science determine whether our moral choice would be better?
That is
than the
exactly
other?
the case.
Right.
The theory of moral relativism states that we can never solve these problems because you and I might have a different take on this. And that's absolutely wrong. Science, by looking at how we treat each other over time, what's going on right now, comes to the definitive that this is more good than more bad. And the idea that you can't say that my morals are wrong because I see it different from you is absolutely wrong.
But unto
Your
what,
morals can be wrong and proven scientifically
I'm just curious,
wrong.
unto
Yes.
what standard are we proving them to? You can say more or less, but that means you have created a rule.
Truth.
Absolutely.
No, truth. This is what I was going to
Absolutely.
use the example of
Yes,
the gay
you can.
marriage thing. I think it would be helpful. So let's say I make a claim about gay marriage. Two men getting married will produce a child with emotional deficits or psychological deficits or some kind of dysfunction. That's a fair possibility, right? It's certainly possible that two men trying to raise a kid, there's not enough of a balance or something, so the communication suffers and so the child is dysfunctional. That's a serious concern. I think that's a valid concern. And I think Christians, when they're thinking about gay marriage, and they're thinking, well, what if the kid's dysfunctional? Yeah, what if the kid is dysfunctional? Because we don't want a bunch of dysfunctional kids. All right. So this is a claim about reality. It's a moral claim. My argument is that moral claims are attempts at facts. Moral claims are scientific claims. We just call them something else because culturally these are important things to us. And so we use the word moral. But a lot of philosophy is just using different terms based on what's really important to us as animals. Okay, fine, we'll call them moral claims. They're claims, okay? They're claims about reality. So the claim is two men getting married will have necessarily more discord in the household. Okay, this has actually been studied by sociologists, and there doesn't seem to be any evidence of this. Assuming they're both employed, they both have a healthy personality, the communication is good. Of course, all these variables that would make any relationship healthy. If they're operating among two men, their relationship is healthy. Or two women, their relationship is healthy. And there doesn't seem to be any evidence that two dads or two moms raising a kid produces a pathology in the child, short of that kid being bullied for having two parents that are gay. So I'm open to this claim as a sociologist. I think it's a really important argument that Christians make, but it's an attempt at a fact. And in my mind, it's an attempt at a fact about gay people's neurology, child rearing, child development, family dynamics. It's a fascinating claim, but I just don't see any evidence for it. So
And I think what he's
there you
also
go.
alluding to is the idea that science can prove this. Besides the cases that he points, there are scientific studies over and over that show that the highest rates of divorce, the highest rates of sexual deviance, the highest rates of child pornography is the Christian evangelicals in the South. It is a fact. And that's why I think what Kevin's trying to say is instead of trying to find your morals from outside yourself, our human selves, we know from studies what works for children, what works for people. We know what doesn't work.
Actually,
Your study
I have to say
doesn't.
there's studies
hold on.
that show that
your
Christian
study
families
doesn't
are
tell you anything.
more integrated.
Your
too.
study tells you data. You're
Exactly.
interpreting.
You're
your
interpreting
data.
the data.
You are an interpreter, and so you are bringing your ruler out of your
I
pocket.
just absolutely
No,
disagree.
I get it. Psychometric measures that are created by
Right.
who?
No, they're created by multiple scientists who are
Sure.
trying
Agreed.
to each make a
Right.
career
But
on top
say
of each
you
other,
find-
so they validate the hell out of
And
us.
I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried
Let
about the
me
specific. I'm
cut
just
this
asking about the
piece
general.
off because I don't want to get into the
weeds.
interpreting studies.
Oh wait, no, but that's my point. Actually, details with interpretive, and that's my case. Is that
But
morality has an interpretation? We just said that with the bread. That my
But
interpretation of the
it kind
question
of goes to a
is
different point because you can have a God source of morality and just not follow it.
Absolutely, that's part of the narrative that we said.
But I would even say, though, when you do...
having it from the deity source doesn't necessarily make you follow it.
So you get, like, say you do a psychological study and you find out some correlation between this and that, right? People who do this get depressed. That doesn't tell you anything about what to do with those people.
Okay, let me use another example that you won't-
still have to conclude from that study
I get this.
what the data is saying. And as soon as you do that, you're invoking your own morality.
You guys
I don't know how
feel-
you avoid your own opinion or your own background or your own preconceived notions of whether there is or isn't a God when you look at data, because that's what determines it. Oftentimes you have problems in data when you come to psycho research where people have been in this mindset for so long, they're opposed to having any other outside resource come in and kind of debate that, and it gets closed off.
I get you.
Because they're interpreting data. We always do this.
I'm sorry. They were both hostile. Let me give you another example so that we can get over this stuff. Christians have for a long time said that the family is very important for child rearing. Having two parents in the home, not mom working all the time, dad working all the time. And you know what? Christians were right about that. So the evidence clearly shows that having two parents in the home is better for the kids. Divorce increases the likelihood of conduct disorders in school. It increases the likelihood of juvenile delinquency. So, okay, yes, we can criticize science, but let's just get past that. You guys feel attacked from our examples. I get that. It was attacking. She's telling you that Christians are crappy parents, and I'm telling you that you guys are wrong.
I'm taking it as an attack.
There's a lot you guys are totally right about that
at all.
science supports. Yeah. And let's talk about that.
Well, I just say, just to speak from a guy who has 2 degrees in soft science, I like science a lot. I love it. I love psychology. I like to read studies. To me, though, when I look at it, it's data. I have to interpret it. That's part of the dialogue that we get in is, what is this data saying? I disagree. I want to do a whole other study based on the data that you've given me, because I don't think this conclusion is actually what's going on or corresponds to a truth. Okay. But I'm bringing all of my presuppositions to that particular argument. I'm bringing my morality, I'm bringing my ethics, I'm bringing all of that in, and that is part of the process that we have to monitor. So
the reason we're sensitive to that is because in the process of interpretation in Scripture, the Bible, for example, there is an entire conversation over how you understand the intention of the original authors. Can you get there? Can you use the data? And so there's a question of, there is a scientific method used in the interpretation of ancient texts called hermeneutics. We're versed in that. We work through that. But there's always the question of the
which religion? I mean,
basically, it's a linguistic science.
There are thousands of interpretations of pretty much any scriptural basis.
Oh, I understand that. The basic training that I've been given is a linguistic training. So you're asking questions of what's the backgrounds, what are the biases, what was going on in the history, what does the word mean, what's it mean in the general culture, what's the logic saying in this particular text, so that you're attempting to get as close as you can to what was meant to the original audience when it's written. And so that's how and then from there you can apply it to if that matches a current cultural situation.
So that's kind of analogous to a soft science.
It is very analogous. In fact, it's used in literary work when you're interpreting anything other than the Bible as well. Right. And so, but the biggest question that has been raised is, how do you understand when you're drawing your biases into the question and looking at the data? And so there's an entire conversation on that out there about how do you take apart the locutor, the interlocutor, and all of these pieces that are involved in the middle.
Okay, so let me.
Which is the same problem.
So you've got a statement that a deity exists. Then you've got a belief that a deity exists, and then you've got the interpretation based on the hermeneutics. I want to ask you, Kevin. You can jump in if you know this, but you know probably more of this from your. What do we know on the science side from evolutionary origins of morality?
Oh. Okay, well, let's start so first of all, you had this Italian researcher named Giacomo Rizzolatti, and in Italy, he was studying these monkeys, and they were being taught how to crack nuts. And the interviewer came into the experiment room, and the monkey's brain is connected to this scanner that's scanning its neurological activity. I think it was an EEG. And the researcher comes in and cracks a nut, and the monkey just sees the nut being cracked. And it turns out the monkey simulated cracking what the motor movements that would be required for cracking that nut when it saw the researcher do this. And so this was the first study that showed the existence of mirror neurons. And the idea is that we understand other people's actions and behaviors by simulating in our own mind what it would be like to do this ourselves from a motor perspective, from a physiological movement perspective. So if you see someone hit their thumb when they're hammering a nail and they accidentally miss the nail and they slam their thumb, especially if you're familiar with this person or something, you're going to wince. It's because you're simulating in your own mind what it would be like to have that experience at a much lower level of intensity. So mirror neurons are one thing that bonds human beings together. But we don't just mirror everybody. We mirror people we're more familiar with, people who share our demographic characteristics like race, and we mirror people of higher status relative to people of lower status. So we tend to bond in very interesting and unexpected ways to different people in our community, partly through these mirror neurons. Okay, the other thing I'd say about this is a great anthropologist named Christopher Boehm. I think he's at UCLA. He's very interesting. And what he's done is he has scanned the literature, all available literature, on existing hunter-gatherer societies. Okay, so existing forager societies. A lot of these people live in Australia, but they live elsewhere as well. And what he finds, and these are the earliest form of social organization for human beings. So the human species is about 300,000 years old, give or take. And for about 90% of this existence, for like the last 10,000 years or so, we've lived in cities. But for most of our existence, we lived in these small bands of foragers, where we'd hunt and we'd gather and we'd raise kids collectively, and they'd be about groups of 50 people. And so there's a researcher named Robin Dunbar who shows that human neurology is best equipped to understand the deep emotional circumstances of about 50 people. And so it's hard for us to really bond in a familial way to groups larger than 50. We start to think in the abstract. We think of our nation, and we use these abstract terms to bond to these larger collectives. But real deep friendships, about 50 people is the sweet spot. Anyway, so you have these groups of foragers, and what Christopher Bohm is, he studies their social organization. And they look down on infidelity, they look down on theft. I mean, they have all the things that you would expect a group of 50 humans to care about. They care about people putting in proper effort in the hunt, and putting in effort in gathering, in alloparenting. So if a parent gets sick and they can't watch their kid, you look after their kid for them. I mean, they value these things, and these are important to them. And if you don't fulfill your obligations, you're at risk of being abandoned by the tribe, or in some cases killed, like speared to death. They take this very, very seriously. And if you were to ask them, all right, what's your objective morality? They're going to say staying alive on the damn savannas. With 50 people who I know very well. These are imperatives, and if we don't take care of these things, we all die. So that's their objective. Now, I know you would say it's subjective, but it's subjective in the sense that all groups of 50 humans will care about the same things. We're all going to have similar problems about who to marry, how to take care of kids, how to get food. That's true independent. Chimps have that same problem. Any animal that lives in a small group has these problems.
So if we've got, if morality is good, what we would consider good, proper behavior, where does that lead to altruism, for example? I mean, that would be...
Well, this is...
tribal cultures.
Yeah, so where you've got... Because obviously, you go back and you look at an animal, whatever time period, and, the basic thing is what keeps me alive kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So
what keeps the group alive? Because you depend on the group for your own life. This is...
Well...
It's not.
Okay.
You're right. The selection is on the gene.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna go individual, but you can also add can and group and all that to it. But, but what causes? What's the theory or hypothesis for that spreading to helping, or an impulse to help others, or a desire to help others to some degree? I mean,
Or any kind of universal understanding of what is good for all, not just my tribe. When you're talking about universal rights.
Yeah.
Yes.
Obviously, there's selfishness that still exists as part of the mix.
Sure. Okay, well, there's two things. So Robert Trivers is a famous biologist. He came up with reciprocal altruism. And the idea here is that two animals will help each other because at a period of vulnerability, they can count on the animal they've been helping to help them to reciprocate. And so evolution has selected for brains to prefer exchange partners, friends, family, colleagues, that reciprocate exchanges, that help us when we need it. We have moral emotions like guilt and shame when we don't reciprocate. I mean, this is built into us. The other thing is social learning. This is why we put kids in school and why we put them around a bunch of different diverse peers and environments, is because we're trying to get them to learn to create these kind of reciprocal relationships and foster the emotions that are conducive to those with a lot of different types of people. And in a country like the US, it's as diverse as us. This kind of thing is very important. So that's the question of altruism.
Okay, so that's a lot there. So let's get some comments over here.
Well, I think it's interesting. The question I have, just when I look at any kind of data that you're looking at, is that it's explaining a phenomenon of some kind. The question is, what do we say to that ultimately? Because even within tribes, you're going to find people fighting. Yes. Where does the concept of human rights to all human individuals come from? That's really the difficulty for me. It's easier when you have an outside source to go, well, God gave that to them, and it's innate. Also, there are things that we share because of what we call common grace. God gives us; He created us a certain way. We're going to all derive to certain kind of operations that are very similar. That actually we have some sense of knowing what's right and wrong. It's just altered by our own what we would call sin nature. But so when you do studies and people say this is how people act, I'm like, cool, that seems valuable to me. The question becomes, what then should we do after we've identified how people act to make them act in an image that's actually objectively true or something that we should draw closer to as a society? As soon as you make that conclusion, you're invoking a morality at that point. You're actually saying, well, I disagree with you. I think it should be this way or that way. And that's where a lot of the fighting comes from.
Human rights are defined by societies, right? I mean, we have this debate all the time about how far we should go about, now we're doing, is healthcare a right, for example? And, we've had rights and questions about what's right in the past. So aren't human rights based on...
Are they defined by society? Because that would be the problem for me. Like, other societies define them differently. So who's to say ours are right over other groups? If that's what makes it better for them. So it's not universal in that sense. It becomes tribal when you do that. If I say God created us a certain way, we need to treat each other with decency and dignity. Regardless of our tribes, it doesn't matter then my own personal link towards my tribe. I've got to submit to an objective understanding.
But this goes back, I think, to what Ravon was saying, because if you've got two, let's just say countries, to just take a large group of people without defining which country is who, it doesn't matter. You've got one country that says, it's a right for everybody to eat. So it's our job to provide food. And then you've got another country that says some other right. And then you've got sort of a worldwide sort of status, if you will. And then what is wrong with society working at all of these levels? I mean, we can it's pretty obvious that
the fact that we don't agree often. I mean, if there isn't, if we all have an opinion about rights, then that doesn't mean that we're sharing the same object. If it's not objective and it doesn't come from somewhere, it's just all our opinions. It's just what we think it is. Yeah. And so the question I have is, how do you have human rights at all if it doesn't come from another source other than ourselves?
But the problem is, I think I see what you're getting at, but the problem I have is I think we have to work with the disagreement of different opinions, because it's a practical thing. I mean, we've got some religions right now that think it's perfectly valid to throw people off the roofs, and that to them is a valid thing. And on the other hand, on the world stage, we can say that sex slavery is bad, and we all agree on that. I think culturally we have come to that as a collectively. So we have these. Isn't there room to work within that realm of developing a world standard that we can all agree on, and hopefully would increase over time? And Steven Pinker talks about how morality and violence as violence has gotten less, morality has gotten stronger over time. Granted, we have what you said the difference is, but that's where the work is to be done. That's where the work gets done, by having those communications.
I think what I personally wonder about is
particularly when you go to, as I mentioned before, behind each religion, you have each of them saying, well, mine is objective. Yes. So you're doesn't matter.
Well, I think everybody says that, religion or not. So to me, if you took religion out of the equation, you still have the same problem of us debating over what human rights is, because I might think of it different than you do.
Yeah, but isn't that okay?
Well, is it okay? Well, if it's a matter of taste, it's not okay, because it's just whatever I feel, and whatever I feel is valuable to me. And so it doesn't matter what you say, I just do whatever I want. Now, how I treat people may be better for me. It's because that's the best way to treat people. Some people think the best way to treat people is to throw them off roofs. I don't think that's true. But you see what I'm saying? Like, how do we come to any objective understanding if it's just based on myself?
The question that comes down to that is, say we have this global idea of morality. Who enforces that? And then who governs their morality?
That's an important thing to be dealt with. But you're right. And that's a whole other discussion. But yeah,
because
that's a very important thing.
That leads to a very intimate question for Christianity on morality, which is the question of what's the grounding of morality, in the sense that Erythro asked the question in the sense of, well, okay, when it comes to rape, is rape wrong and God says it's wrong because he knows it's wrong and it's beyond him? Or is it's his arbitrary choice that rape is wrong and therefore it's wrong? Or is rape just something that is and we don't like it, so we need to deal with it? That's kind of how I view it. And the answer that we come to is no, God in himself is morality, and therefore it will never change. It is always wrong, because in and of himself he says, no, this is wrong. I am a morally good God, and therefore it doesn't change.
Where does it say that in the Christian Bible, that rape is wrong?
Well, that rape is wrong.
Yes.
And I'd start from Genesis chapter 1, where it begins that all men are created in the image of God, and the image of God he created them, which implies total human value.
No, but where does it say that rape is wrong? I can
when it
apply
says
anything
that
from
you shall not commit
an
adultery.
Okay, still, where does it say that rape is
That it
wrong?
would be considered adultery.
So you interpret that adultery
No,
is wrong.
that's
means
language
that
of it.
rape is
The
wrong.
ancient concept was that adultery is any sex beyond the marital bonds, and therefore rape outside of those marital bonds is wrong. It's a natural conclusion within the text, and it's what's in.
Okay, so let's look at this
Do you
from
need
another.
to? We don't need everything.
I'm just
to be
disagreeing, but
stated.
that's
Do you
okay.
think rape's okay?
Is that what I said?
You just said we disagree. I think we both agree that rape's wrong.
Of
course
I
we do.
disagree with
Okay.
your
Yeah.
interpretation of the Bible.
So one argument is it's wrong because it's in the Bible. It's wrong. That's and I think you can make. I mean, a little bit of gymnastics here, but you can make the case that the Bible is clear on this. But look, let me give you another argument. Humans are mammals. They're primates. We live in hierarchies, but we value our autonomy. We value our autonomy. We value freedom. We value freedom of movement. Now, it's freedom of movement according to what our group wants us to do. So some of us will voluntarily restrict our movement because our parents tell us to, or our friends, okay, fine. But we like to make or feel like we're making our own choices about our own movement. Secondarily, female primates, especially female humans, more than any, invest an immense amount of resources into their children in utero, in the womb. Humans have the longest gestation period at 9 months. We have these massive craniums, which oftentimes kills the mother in childbirth in countries that don't have a sophisticated medical technology. So that would be a good reason for the woman to be able to have the choice. It would be a good reason to believe that all women everywhere are genuinely happier making an autonomous decision about who they have sex with. Because they like autonomy of decision and movement, and because of the massive parental investment they put into that baby. Okay, fine. I just scientifically reason my way to rape is wrong. Why, isn't that better than it's wrong because it's in this book, and this is my book, and if you don't agree,
I just was curious. Aren't you just using linguistic games if everything is determined? Rape is okay because that rapist was determined to rape according to his.
That doesn't make it okay. No, that's your move that you're making.
No. But I mean, you're saying it's wrong, but it just is. In materialism, what makes it wrong versus is?
Okay, so there's the naturalistic fallacy, right? You could say because something exists or it's natural, therefore it's good. That's a naturalistic fallacy. I'm not saying it's good. Rape is totally wrong, but it happens. Why does it happen? Because men are physically larger. This is a big reason why.
I didn't ask how. Why is it wrong?
Why is it wrong? Because women are mammals and they're primates, especially humans in particular, of course, and they value their autonomy as a result of that evolutionary.
There is no
history.
autonomy. You already said that earlier.
They value the perception of their autonomy. They like feeling like they're choosing what they're doing.
So
like
you're using words that don't have actual scientific fact that there's autonomy.
I would also say primates in culture.
I'm trying to understand.
No, I know. I'm trying to understand you because you said there's no real choice. Autonomy is the ability to have choice. So you keep saying they value their perception of autonomy, which means there is no such thing as autonomy. You said that.
I understand what you're saying.
I'm totally confused.
We're talking about two different things. If we're talking about the objective natural universe, then yes. Everything is determined at the molecular and atomic and subatomic level. We have to kind of concede this. But if we're looking at the science of human subjectivity, the science of morality, the science of the things that people prefer and the ways they'd like to be treated, if we're talking about a science of subjectivity, and yes, we're moving ontologically here. We're doing a little bit of philosophical two-step.
Yeah,
but it's consistent. But now we're talking about exactly. Fair.
It's not objectivity.
I'd also say primates
it's objectively true that females will prefer autonomy. And they'll prefer to make choices about who they invest in reproductively. Yes, this is objectively true. It's an objective true fact about a subjective state.
I'm not disagreeing. I believe that autonomy exists. I actually believe it truly is something. That there are true choices that are being made, and that now, while we would disagree on the ultimate results and other ethical issues, but I agree fundamentally that yes, autonomy exists. I'm wondering how you ground autonomy for the sake of morality.
Fair.
Also, when you look at the animal community, it doesn't operate like humans do. I mean, animals violate each other all the time, and what it looks like to me, rape. So I don't understand how that equates how it became.
Well, we have Christianity where we violate ourselves all the time.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying though is to an animal.
You didn't hear my story. Christianity understands that we are in rebellion against the God who is good. We are the problem.
Okay.
So
I just want to jump here quick before we leave this rape thing. Rape is not a female problem. There are men and boys raped all the time, and I don't want this to go away with making this sound like
That it's just
rape
all-
is a problem for women. It's just a problem for all. And the reason rape is wrong is because we already said it. It's a violation of a person. It is not good for humanity on a personal level or on any level. But it is a choice that humans can make. And just like you said, of course, animals don't have rape other than human animals. It is an instinctual thing to have sex with whoever is the alpha male, whatever. But because you're humans, we don't do the alpha male thing, hopefully. But I just want to make sure that the reason rape is wrong is because it is a violation of humanity. It is not subjective. It's totally objective.
But a violation
not
of
my choice or my
humanity violation of humanity because we're genetically human, or a violation of humanity because we have the freedom for autonomy. Because I think this gets into other issues that I have in choices.
There is no society, human society, that does agree or should agree that rape is in any way okay.
Absolutely,
It is
agree.
not because it's the majority of us believe that. The majority doesn't matter. It is a violation of a human's person by another human being.
Yeah, and part of this goes to, I mean, there certainly is rape in animal cultures, primates and pre-human cultures, or pre-cultures even. But then you've got, we've gotten to the point where our brains have grown to the point where we have awareness of each
I
other.
disagree that there's rape in animal cultures.
Well,
besides humans,
animals
but
violate
that's
other
okay.
animals against their will, what it looks like.
It's called forced copulations. The biology is filled with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it happens all
Yeah.
the time.
But I mean, we have an awareness of
In
each other,
animals,
so we
besides us.
have empathy now that
And females
that
evolve
the large
protections
brain,
against it.
the larger prefrontal cortex gives us that ability to be aware of.
What
the
makes
other
that
and-
wrong? What if we evolved differently? Would it still be wrong? I guess is the question I would have. So is it just our physiology that's
Could there be
determining
a sudden
morality?
evolutionary change in us
Well,
in
the
the
thing,
future
the
Makes
thing
it
is,
right
when you
all
look
of a
at
sudden.
from an evolutionary perspective, this is the way to evolve because this is.
How do you know that, though?
Yeah,
I will
where are you
explain.
getting that?
I will
right?
explain.
Sorry.
Because if you get into the detail of it and you look at the sequence of events over time, and I'm talking about going back to the pre-human ancestors, you will see that basically what is beneficial is what becomes the next act. So if it's going to evolve in a different way, circumstances would have had to have been different. It is
Can I
it is
ask a question?
beneficial to be.
You keep
Yeah,
using
one second.
beneficial, and I'm confused. So, because I can't keep going, because
Go ahead,
beneficial
go ahead.
is a teleological term.
No. It's just getting the most amount of genes. The activities that produce
Yeah.
the greatest probability of getting genes in the next generation. There's no ethical component to it.
Right.
And there's nothing teleological about it. It's
So
a
rape
blind.
works to do that. That was okay.
It's not okay. You're
Doesn't
using
make it
moral
okay.
language to talk
It
about a
doesn't- we're
biological
talking about
process.
morality.
No, it's like talking
you're
about is it
using
good or bad for me to
biological
I don't know how you
Explain
make the moral
morality.
jump from
It's
an
not a moral
evolutionary
issue.
standpoint.
The moral issue
That
is
would-
rape wrong? Ought we make rape illegal? That's the moral issue. And
No,
the
that's a
answer
legal
is
issue. That's a legal
that
issue.
would-
That's
that
we
would-
can
accepting
make it a
morality.
moral issue because we're human beings. We can also make it an abstract biological issue that's a product of nature. You guys are phase shifting back and forth and we're confusing each other. We're talking on two different levels. Let's talk about how it affects human women personally, their emotions, their futures. All right, we can do that. If we talk about why rape exists as a natural phenomenon, that's a completely separate question for a biology class. If we want to talk about morality, that's a different...
No, I totally agree.
Yeah.
None of us here believe rape should exist. We all agree with that.
And it's a sensitive topic.
It's just a
Of course,
question.
yes.
I believe it's a question for me to ask: on what moral grounds do we draw the line of authority for this morality?
It's a good question.
And we believe it's because God has made us in such a manner.
Okay,
and
wait a
that's-
second. Wait a
that's kind of
second.
the issue.
Let's back up a second.
Okay.
If we all agree on this, then what is the problem? That
I think the
then it
problem
really
is that-
doesn't matter.
Different
what-
noises. We're making different noises.
Yeah, if we all agree,
They're the same
if
emotions,
we
just
are
different
not
noises.
3 million year old apes here. We are where we are now, given the level of culture we are now.
And I think the
and we
point
all
that-
agree that rape is bad. So this should
Yes, we're
actually
on agreement.
Right, but I think the point that
Shouldn't be a-
science would make is that for science, through social sciences, through studying the way that we treat each other, to come to the conclusion that rape is wrong is to prove it through showing the harm to humanity versus what we would consider in science is perhaps chance or obviousness on folks who believe in a God, that it trickled down from God that rape is wrong. Yes, we both agree with this, but it is important how you come to that conclusion from some outside to us mythical source or from us to look at the way that we've treated each other now and in the past and say, we can conclusively say that this is wrong.
Okay, I want to move on.
Okay.
I want to move on. Enough on that. Changing moral opinions, changing your opinion on what is moral. Tell me something about what it would take. I mean, how easy or difficult is it? How do you evaluate? What would it take to we'll just go left to right here, to change your opinion on a moral?
Well, there's two components to this. One would be the data showing something alternative. So let's say you use the two parents being a better source of emotional regulation for a child relative to just one parent, especially if they work a lot. Okay, you'd have to show me data that a single parent working all the time, and it had to be a longitudinal study, big sample size, okay, diverse sample. You'd have to show me that over time, single parents...
Define longitudinal. Just
multiple years or multiple periods
Life
of measurement.
cycles.
It could be generational. It could just be you interview the same person every 5 years, something. Okay, but it would have to show that single parents produce children with better emotional coping skills. Let's say 10 years down the road. Okay, I'd have to see more than one study because this goes against everything I understand about family. Okay, but I would stop myself now. That's the intellectual component. That's the easy part. This is not what I expect. I could be wrong. That's easy. The second part is all the emotional crap that I have as a primate coming to this because I want to have a family and I want to have kids and I want to be a good dad and so I have a certain emotional commitment to my idea of family and what a good family is. And that's unfortunately quite separable from my intellectual commitments, which are often not very emotional and not very reinforced interpersonally oftentimes. So it would be easy for me intellectually to consider that I might be wrong, but for me to really emotionally change how I approach a subject matter, that would take effort. But it's effort I would willingly engage in, and it's emotional labor that I do engage in because I'm genuinely just interested in truth. And this is what bothers me so much about the religion, lack of religion divide, is that we care about the same things, and I think we agree on so much it's insane, but we're using different words, and I wish we could translate. Like we had a translation dictionary of some kind, and I was raised Catholic, so I do know a lot of what you're saying. I know there's differences, but yeah.
Just before I go around, is there anything you want to say in response to that? Not to answer the question, but just in response to what he said? No. Okay, so what would it take?
I'm going
for
to
you?
mirror the same type of thing. That's the great thing about science is that you beg for someone to disagree with you. You're throwing it out there. You're saying, I've looked at this, I've experimented, and this is my scientific conclusion, and I want you to tell me, what did I do wrong? What did I think wrong? I agree that intellectually it's easy to do, but at the same time, what would make me think that my atheistic viewpoint is wrong is for someone to convince me that the harms that I see that religion has done in the world were actually some silver lining or some benefit that I don't see. It's I think that's the value of having that scientific outlook. And I'll disagree with Kevin on this. Morals is the place that we disagree. It's important that we see how moral stem cell research is, how moral abortions are, how moral it is to let every person of every sex, color, or ethnocentrism be the best that they can be, where I see that has not happened in the religious side of the world. So that's what it would take for me to change my mind, my atheistic mind, scientific mind, that I have gotten it wrong.
Okay.
So I guess the only question that came up in my head as stop thinking about what I was going to say and think about what you guys were saying was, if morality has changed for you over time by scientific endeavors, that means you've probably had read that and gotten involved with the data. How does that work practically for the average person? Is the morality that is right now, that's the true morality until science over several generations changes that? So we might as well just have the morality that is right now. And
Can I liken this to our U.S. Constitution? What a great thing. We set out the Constitution, and then we had the, thank heavens, so to speak, the smartness to put in all the amendments. What they say is that this is the best that we can do right now, and guess what? We got a whole bunch of amendments for when we got it wrong. as opposed to having a God where truth comes down from on high or from outside you, and you have to grab your truth first and try to defend it. Science doesn't do that. Science says we're going to amend. We're going to do the best that we can do right now scientifically, and as we figure out that we have it wrong, we're going to raise up the truth. I don't know if that analogy makes sense.
I mean,
to
other
you.
than I would disagree how you're interpreting our view of how God works, that
Okay.
would totally disagree with how that was interpreted.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay, great, thanks.
I would agree in terms of a science of morality being subject to constant revision based on sample sizes, based on new hypotheses, and that is unsettling. And I feel where you guys are coming from, where it's like, what is the bedrock that we're not going to question regarding morality? And I think my bedrock, because the findings are going to change and they're going to shift
And the
within
thinking.
parameters. And I guess my bedrock morality, if you push me there, and I think it's fair, I would say my bedrock morality is kind of a weird answer. It's falsifiability, testability, peer review, critical reflection. That's my bedrock morality. They're not even really obviously moral values, but if I commit to these, I feel like I'll know things about the world that are truer, and I will try to use that to make a better world.
But I mean, how do you know that? I guess my background, again, grounding.
Yeah.
How do you know that that's right?
Testability and falsifiability and all this, because look at the progress that science has made over the last 500 years, just technologically.
That would be based on metrics.
Well, it'd be based on faith. I mean, you're talking about reliability.
No. To answer his question, it's based on metrics. So if you've got, is this behavior versus that? Does this type of interaction create a child that commits suicide less, for example, or some sort of very specific metric? I think that's what he's.
But let me give you a more honest answer to your question. That is an honest answer, but that's a
But they're
different.
confounding variables, even in any kind of a study. And so you have to believe at some point that the data that you're having is reliable enough to make an assertion about.
Scientific work
why you have
isn't
peer
quite
review.
it's not quite as vague as you're saying. The problem with science work is that there are different ways to interpret the findings, but the
Well,
actual
that's-
measurements are pretty precise. But I think that's what
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
I'm saying
that's-
without an objective source,
Yeah.
there's still an interpretation
Of
problem.
course, I agree with you. And so I grant you that, man. And all I would say is I want researchers to disagree with each other and try to undermine each other because
Sure.
this purifies it. It's like iron sharpens iron, this kind of thing. So, but here's the real practical question I think you're asking is, I have an understanding of the science of morality, which is that people have certain expectations for treatment, rooted in their evolutionary biology, for autonomy, freedom of association, and this. But is Kevin a moral person? Am I a moral person? Does this inform how ethical I am on a day-to-day basis? And I don't know that it does. I don't know if I'm any more moral. I've written a book on morality and many articles, science articles in this. I don't know that I'm a better person than someone who hasn't done that. I don't think, I wouldn't bet that I am. And so there is a disconnect between my intellectual, how I understand humans' expectation for treatment and how they'd like to be treated in the evolution. I quite understand this, but does it make Kevin a better person in the day-to-day? I'm not convinced of this. So there might be a divide.
So let me throw it back to the original question for Greg now.
Okay, refresh the original question.
Yeah.
What would it take? What would it take to change your mind on a moral position?
I think first for me is obviously I need to be confronted by the moral question. I'm not thinking obviously of moral questions that I'm not dealing with. So second is then I'm going to go with I go through what I would call a spiral of understanding. I'd start with my basic understanding where my morality is now. So it begins with a knee-jerk reaction, let's be honest. So I would go, and my knee-jerk reaction is going to come from my upbringing, it's going to come from my education, it's going to come from my interpretation of scripture, it's going to come from scientific conversations and things like that are there. So, and being an American, it's going to be pragmatic, very practical, very much like what ultimately is the end that I'm seeking here, because that's how I'm raised as an American. So I get that. So the second move then is I would step back and go, all right, what obviously do I think Scripture says about this? I would look at that, I would examine that, and then I ask questions of it. Like, is that what it means? Is that what was going on in that time period? Is this issue even being asked here? And there's a lot of moral questions today that are implied in the ancient world and in the script and in the writings of the Bible, but that are not detailed described. And so there I have to go back to some basic moral foundations that are broader and interpret from there. So I usually start with the universal value of all humanity. And I'd ask the question of, okay, does this value somebody in the image of God? And then I ask that, and that means, does it give them the ultimate value? Because I can't take it away and I can't give it. Value is automatically intrinsic in the human being because they're a human being. So then I ask the question of, what is this doing to that human being, and where does that fit in those 10 commandments? Because I really do believe those are the best, largest rubric known to humanity to draw in our moral questions. And so from there, I would examine that. And if I find that it fits outside of something I believed before because of my past, because of my upbringing, I would change it as I looked at that and examined the outcome and the works from that text. But I used the Bible for that example then.
Okay. Steve?
So you're asking, as a person, what would cause me to change an individual experience, or am I talking about...
What would cause you to change your opinion on a certain behavior that you used to think was amoral, or not amoral, but immoral?
Or, yeah.
And now you would change your position on it. What would...
I think for me personally, it's an evaluation process. Like you said, like, what is the truth? There are ways to know truth. There's several different ways. So if God's the author of truth, then there's several ways to know a truth, right? One of them, through a limitation of empiricism, I think empiricism has limitations, but it is a way to know a thing. And I should know as much of that as I possibly can of that particular subject. But on top of that, if there is a God and he has an opinion and he's formed that opinion in a text, then mulling over those concepts, what do they mean? What is the intent of the language? How do I comprehend what's going on here and then relate it to my life? So there's this evaluation process that I go through. What is the greater good? Who defines good? These are things that the Bible talks a lot about. And through that kind of judgment and having counsel with other people and just weighing these topics out, you come to what I can find is the closest way to have objective truth. I just feel like for us, it starts with the revelation of God as a big part of that conversation. It doesn't remove empiricism. They're not mutually exclusive. I can look at studies and derive a lot of things to them, but it's incomplete to me. There are other ways to know a thing. And so I'm going to look for as many of those ways as to know the objective truth that's out there. And for me as a Christian, it comes from a God. So he's made it available to me. And I'm going to compare that to a particular situation that's very similar to a text or a very situation to a concept and try to apply that as best I can, knowing that I'm a flawed person and that I could get that wrong.
Okay. So we basically have an extra ingredient on this side. You've got, you weigh the Bible teaches you into the equation. These are both very analytic answers.
Philosophically, if there is a God and he's a person and he has an opinion, I want to know what that is, because oftentimes I got to bend my will to that because I have my own opinion.
Okay. So we're gonna get close to wrapping this up. I want to finish with one sort of a broader question, and again, I want everybody to chime in on this one. What can we do moving forward? In a very broad sense, how do we make this a better, more moral world? And anybody can start.
I'll jump in. I like the idea that we've all kind of agreed about that whatever camp you live in, whatever tribe is yours, be it Muslim or Christian or Jewish or atheist, that we seem to have what we believe is moral and right. And as we become more global, there's a need. We have to get all of these tribes in the same discussion and settle down on what is right and what is wrong, because there's a lot of big differences between us. I look forward to that. That, of course, in my mind, that's because I think that science will bubble up, and the idea of a God, not specifically your God, but all the gods that are out there at the moment, to me will become, in fact, irrelevant. That whether or not you say you get your morals from high or from bubbling up, that we're all going to find not just the moral thing, but a moral landscape, a range of good and moral ways to live, to treat ourselves and to treat each other people. I think that's how this all gets resolved, and it means that those people who are hard and fast on their textbook that they believe has come down from a God are going to have to make some concessions to those other people who have their own textbook. In this case, my textbook is a science book. But my belief is that when it's all said and done, science will prove out two good morals, and whether or not you believe in a God will not be relevant to the conversation.
Okay, we're going to just go back and forth here. So,
Okay?
anybody on this side?
So how do we move forward? I guess the question is on what? I guess, what are we moving forward on? I think there's a lot of things in Christianity that we can come to an agreement on as far as what's given to, from our Christian perspective, to non-Christians. There's something we call common grace. God's enabled us to do certain things, and there are good that other people can access whether they acknowledge the God completely. So there's part of what we do when we move forward that we can agree on. Like, what if we have the same opinion about a particular subject morally, like rape, we can all agree that we have different conclusions as to why. We can solve a problem of rape within the society. But the question for us as a Christian is a completeness one. To me, moving together on the things we agree to is always a good thing, having that conversation. But we're always going to run into a truth problem when we get to which way do we go when it comes to the ultimate submission of who's a God, who's designed everything. Because there's always going to be a stopping point, no matter what your view is. Whether it's a scientific perspective or a different religion, it's all an opinion about God when it comes to the highest form. When you're talking about past life, what happens when you die, some of the more fundamental humanistic struggles that people have, some of those things are always going to hit a religious point and that we're going to never agree on if we don't come to some conclusion. But there's a lot of commonality. And from a Christian perspective, the reason why there is a commonality is God designed us. So we can share in common certain things morally, and that's how we have a constitution, in my opinion. You have a natural, if you believe in natural law or you believe in certain kind of common goodness, we can argue that as an objective truth and come to some betterment for a society. But for Christians, is another concern. Is like, what is your relationship like with God? How do you connect with Him? How does humanity connect together? That's slightly different. There's going to be these issues that pop up where that is the key reason why we're not moving forward. So on areas where we can agree on civility and how we treat each other respectfully, I think there's a lot of common ground that we can move on. But when it comes to some of these key fundamental positions, we're going to disagree because of our worldviews. They're in conflict with each other. So
It's a little pessimistic there because you kind of have us stuck there.
Well, I would say, to me, I don't find that any different. So, like, if you have science here, I mean, if you're asking me, do I think mankind can ever get along? It depends on what you mean. I mean, to me, society can get better. We all get along, but that doesn't have anything to do with our relationship with God or what's actually true. And so we can move forward on certain areas, but what about the fundamental one, like our relationship with a God? If He has an opinion, He created us as His creation, does He have a say in that relationship? And if you don't believe He exists and He does, that's a problem. And there are certain things that affects a society on that are unique to that particular problem. It may not involve all issues, but on those issues that it does, it's going to have conflict.
Kevin?
Yeah, I'm not convinced these differences are very substantive. I know that they're there. I know that they are matters of philosophical abstraction. But we have to remember that these cross-faith, if you'd like to call it this, or cross-assumption or cross-axiom dialogues are fruitful and they're new. And ancient Greece managed to be quite diverse and integrated, and they had these little community just like this. Every time there's a contentious thing on the news, someone like Phil would put this together and the whole community would be here. And I know that there are differences. I'm not convinced of how substantive and how real deep they are. There's this guy, sociologist named Emil Durkheim, and his whole argument was that God and society are very, very, very similar to one another. God lives on forever. Society lives on forever. Each one of us will die, but society will live on forever. Just as we are indebted to God for everything, our language, our custom, we are indebted to society for everything. I understand that you prefer to use the word God and you're part of a community that uses the word God, and I myself was raised in a community that uses the word God. I swear to you, from my personal point of view, there's an immense amount of agreement between us, and that it's the noises and the symbols that are different. And we're not going to move away. The Christians aren't going to move to another country. The non-religious people aren't going to move to another country. We will coexist. And as long as there are people like Phil and others who, do these kinds of things, we will get past this. I'm very optimistic about it. So there's another side, I guess.
Greg, you get the final word.
Yeah.
Sort of.
No, yeah, you'll get the final word.
Good.
No, I think that how do we make the world more moral? Again, coming from my perspective, is coming from a pragmatic perspective, dialogues. Great. I think they're helpful. I think these kind of things are increasingly helpful. Probably need to be more specific if we're really going to solve moral issues. Because I disagree. I think they are substantive. The debates on abortion, debates on right to die, and some cases of contraception, of transgenderism, homosexuality, divorce, marriage, lying, pornography, usury, covetousness, anger. These are all major moral differences between worldviews.
I think if we talk more, okay, that's fair.
So I really, and I think they come down to a fundamental question for me is whose are we? Are we our own, or are we to be one who, in the end, are we each other's? Are we our own, or are we ultimately post our mortal lives? Because I'm a supernaturalist. Will we stand before one who has and holds the ultimate authority? To me, there is plenty of evidence out there that one has come. He has revealed himself. He resurrected from the dead, and we should listen to him. In the sense that doesn't get very far in a conversation. That's a full other conversation. Again, that gets into grounding and all kinds of stuff. But to make a more moral world is really a question of what kind of children are we going to raise? And how are you going to teach your children what is morally right and what is morally wrong? And where you ground that is a child's biggest question. Why should I do that? Having 4 children, you better have a good answer. And to be quite honest, I'm not so sure an accumulation of data over several centuries is going to answer a child's why question as well. And maybe this sounds simplistic and reveals like, oh, that sounds like an obvious flaw in the theory. But to me, it seems very, very obvious that the God who would create a world with children in it would create the answer, the question in the children's heart, so that we would answer it with, well, to be quite honest, we're not our own. And we ultimately need to stand before one who has told us how to live. And I hope that you would choose the right thing so that you would stand rightly before him. And obviously we haven't. So I think from there comes the dialogue. But dialogue, definitely dialogue.
Let me borrow your list.
Absolutely.
The list.
The list.
It's a partial.
I can't even read that one.
I'm sorry.
Looks like tizanidine, but that's because I'm a pharmacist. So.
Transgender. Transgenderism.
He has a hammer, everything looks
my
like a
2
nail.
cents, I mean, he's got a list of very specifics, and you're right. I think these do need to be dealt with. My 2 cents here is that I think we need to work on a global set of standards of acceptable behavior. And granted, there's differences in different cultures and within different religions and belief systems. But over time, I think if we do this, we will slowly improve. We can see how far we've gotten by looking back to see where we were. And I've mentioned sexual slavery is still out there. Pretty much the whole world exists that this is an inappropriate thing. So it's an example of something where we were on one side, we can get to the other side. I think we just need to continue on that at a global level to decide what we decide is literally a collective group of societies as what's appropriate, what is inappropriate, and then we have to get into the enforcement issues. But I think that's where we should be seeing more work. Okay, so a lot there. I hope you've had some good thoughts on what we're doing and made you think. We're going to take a little bit of a break here and then come back and do some audience Q&A. And really, thank you, everybody. This is a good panel.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you.
That was really cool.